أيضا شارك في هذه الاجتماعات السيد توني بلير رئيس الوزراء البريطاني الأسبق ومبعوث الرباعية للشرق الأوسط. نسأله عن الاجتماعات التي أجريت على الهامش، التعهدات لإعادة الإعمار والقضية الفلسطينية عموما. هل القضية الفلسطينية تنحت جانبا مع الحرب على الإرهاب؟ Mr. Blair, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
How serious do you think people or the countries and the international community is ready? How serious it's pledging assistance to reconstructing Gaza?
I think people are completely serious about doing it. They're serious about solidarity with Gazan people. There's enormous amount of sympathy for what they've been through. And I think you'll get the money pledged, and it'll be pledged genuinely. I think the challenge is, will the politics of the situation allow this to be the last time we have a Gaza reconstruction conference where we're pledging large sums of money only to find conflict breaking out a short time after?
What is the mechanism that is going to be used to implement those pledges or to use the money in the reconstruction? What is it exactly with the UN and the Israelis and the Palestinians on the ground?
I mean, there is a mechanism that's being agreed between the UN, the Israelis and the Palestinians and with the international community, which will allow the reconstruction materials to go in to rebuild things like electricity, water, sanitation, all the things that we need in Gaza, but also private construction materials because there's massive housing shortage as well, and we need to build more homes. So I don't think it will be incredibly difficult. I think it'll be relatively okay to get the construction materials in and to do the building. I think there are two big challenges, though. One is, can we unify Gaza and West Bank under one Palestinian Authority? Or are we going to carry on with a split Palestinian politics? Because in my view, this split is fundamental to the problem of resolving the whole conflict with the Israelis. And the second thing is, will the Israeli government be prepared to negotiate on a basis of a viable Palestinian state, which is one essentially based on 1967 borders with land swaps? I mean, so those are the two political challenges. And if those two challenges can't be resolved, then we can do what we can for people in Gaza, and we will, but it won't give them a secure future.
On the Palestinian split, do you think that the new government, the new coalition government, will hold, or is it a fragile deal that after getting the money will split again?
Well, it's a good question again. I mean, I think it can hold, although at some point you're going to have elections on the Palestinian side. I mean, it's been 8 years since we've had elections. But the real thing is, can you get an agreed basis for that reconciliation that promotes peace? So I keep saying to people, the issue is reconciliation between the two sides of Palestinian politics, good or bad. It's obviously a good thing, but it's only going to work if there's an agreed set of principles at the heart of it. In other words, will Hamas genuinely come under the authority of one Palestinian Authority? Will it put away its weapons and so on, or put everything under the one sovereign Palestinian Authority? And will that authority be able to have the freedom to govern in the way that it needs to for Palestinian statehood to become a reality? So these are the practical questions, frankly, that are at the heart of this.
But again, the blockade, the Palestinians are worried about the blockade. With this blockade on the ground, you can never really have a better economy in Gaza.
No, that's correct. And that's why you've got to get materials in and allow freedom of movement of people. And so you have to have a Gaza that's free and connected to the world. That's absolutely right. But the only way you're going to get that on a sustainable basis is if the Palestinian Authority is in charge in Gaza.
What is the role of the quartet in all of that? There is a feeling that the quartet has subsided. I mean, it's not really playing a very effective role these days.
The quartet, first of all, you can distinguish between two things. My actual role as the quartet representative is really around the Palestinian economy. And frankly, if the politics is not moving forward, that becomes very, very difficult. But the quartet as a body is really just a way of managing the international community. So you have the two principal countries with a big interest traditionally in the process, United States and Russia, and you've got the two major institutions, the UN and the EU. So the quartet, in the end, is just the international community. It's just a way of managing the international community. And frankly, it's only as strong as the political process allows it to be. And if the political process is broken down, the quartet on its own, I'm afraid, can't really do much to revive it. So that's why we need a political negotiation to be put back in place. And then we're in a position where we've got massive economic plans for both the West Bank and Gaza, which we're enthusiastic about, but we need a benign political atmosphere to get it done.
But many are also very critical of your role, and they say that you're not playing enough to mediate or even to push or to make things happen.
Right. I mean, look, I'm not in charge of the political negotiation, it should just be said, but it's difficult for everyone. I mean, I'm out in the region. I've done this job now for this role for 7 years, ex officio, unpaid. I'm out in the region once, twice a month. I think when I go back again tonight to Jerusalem, it will be something like my 130th visit since I left office. But you know, whether it's me or it's John Kerry or it's President Obama or it's David Cameron or whoever it is, in the end, you can only do as much as the political situation allows you to do. Now, you can push and guide and persuade, and I can assure you, I spend a large amount of my time doing all of that. But ultimately, you know, the responsibility is also there on the Israelis and their politics and the Palestinians and their politics. So I'm not, you know, I'll carry on working and doing whatever I can. But, you know, sometimes there's a slight danger. Everyone in this dispute wants to push responsibility onto the outside world. There's also responsibility in their own politics.
You're going to Jerusalem, as you say. What are you going to tell the Israelis?
What I always tell them, which is it should be in your interest to promote Palestinian statehood. Your best security as Israel for the future will be a viable Palestinian state. Now, what they say to me is, okay, but will it be securely run? Or do we have Hamas on the West Bank, still committed to violence? And so, you know, in that dialogue, you have the heart of the problem. We need the Israelis to commit to a viable Palestinian state and to ease the movement of the Palestinians so that they can start building their economy and their institutions in the way they want. But we also need Palestinian politics to be unified in pursuit of peace.
But it seems that we're asking the international community to pay for the crimes of someone else. The only one that is not paying are the Israelis. Does this look fair, sound fair for you?
Well, look, that's one of the things that people have said at this conference throughout it. But the reality is this, that the international community will have to step up and fund this reconstruction. The real question is not so much, I mean, I think, you know, for the Palestinians, it's not so much a question of the Israelis paying, it's the Israelis being in a position where they allow the Palestinians to grow their economy, you know, to make it function effectively. So, for example, one of the things we work on many parts of the Palestinian economy, but one part of it is Area C on the West Bank, which is 60% of the West Bank. Why can't the Palestinians develop parts of it, boost its economy? It wouldn't need all the money from elsewhere. Secondly, why can't you have goods go from Gaza to the West Bank? It would improve the private sector in Gaza, provide jobs. You wouldn't need so much money. Thirdly, you've got the gas field off Gaza called Gaza Marine. If you develop that, the Palestinian Authority would get a huge amount of revenue from it. So there's all these big political questions, and then there's some very, very basic practical ones.
But maybe if they pay what they've destroyed, they would not destroy it again.
Yeah, but you know, then they will get into an argument of, well, Hamas have sent the rockets, and you know, we are where we are, and that's the way that we handle it.
If we move to another subject, ISIS, the coalition against terrorism, when you look at Iraq in such a terrible state, when you look at the Iraqi army, do you feel for 1 second, do you feel responsible that this country have gone into this shamble?
You know, I'm certainly responsible for the decision to remove Saddam Hussein in 2003. I take responsibility for it. I don't personally believe we'd be in a better situation in this region today if, as well as the nightmare you have in Syria, where you've got a leader trying to hold on against a Sunni majority that want some participation in the politics of the country. If you had the same thing in Iraq, except with a Sunni minority leader trying to keep out a Shia majority. I think You can argue about that, whether it's right or wrong to have done what we did in 2003, and that's a long discussion. But the truth of the matter is, ISIS and ISIL regrouped, regrew, refinanced themselves, rearmed in Syria as a result not of a policy of intervention by the West, but as a policy of non-intervention. So, you know, you can argue about the past. I think the question is what to do about the future. And as I've often said to people, I think there's one struggle going on across this region now today, whether it's Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, wherever it is, even here in Egypt. And it's between those people who believe in open-minded societies and modern economies and those people who want an Islamist view of society and the economy that takes us backwards.
But you don't feel responsible for supporting an American decision at the time that resulted in such an army that cannot even stand. The Iraqi army cannot even stand. One of the best armies in the region.
Let's go back to 2010, 2011, when ISIS and al-Qaeda were beaten in Iraq. Now, the fact is, some responsibility, I'm afraid, has also got to go with those that governed Iraq up until a short time ago. So, you know, you can debate who's responsible, but in the end, you know, the thing now, I think, is to form an alliance between those of us from the outside and those of you on the inside of the region who believe in the same things, because this is the fight that's going on. And you can say, well, the Iraqi army should have been better, or it would have been better if Saddam was still in Iraq, which we can argue about, or we can argue about what Bashar Assad is doing in Syria or what Gaddafi did in Libya. All of that is, you know, very interesting for historians. The question now is, what are we going to do, not just about the threat that ISIS or ISIL poses, because my view is very, very clear. You get rid of ISIS.
With airstrikes?
Yeah, well, personally, I think you will have to engage them on the ground as well. But, you know, you get rid of ISIS, that's not the end of this issue. Let's be very clear about that. And I am, you know, you look at what's happening in Libya today, which I think we've really got to watch really carefully. It's a fundamental question for the West to get the right position on. You look at what's been happening in Yemen just in the last few months. And, you know, to be very blunt about it, you look at Egypt today. How do you think this conference would be that we're having today with President Sisi coming and with the international community all there if we hadn't had your second revolution in Egypt, right? So we in the West, and, you know, I've learned a lot in these last years, and I've spent the last 7 years out in this region, studying it, working in it, thinking about it.
What is the most important thing that you've learned in the past few years in the region?
To listen to the people in the region and to make our policy from the West the product of engaging and listening to the allies who basically support the values that we support in this region. And that these revolutions that started in 2011, that swept across the region, what they really show is that the status quo was not sustainable, and that the fundamental question is, can you transit now in this region to what I would, as I said earlier, what I would call open-minded societies that are religiously tolerant, that are, you know, connected to the world, or do you default to a type of reactionary political philosophy based on, in my view, a perversion of Islam, but which would return us to a situation where we're in conflict with each other and societies are going nowhere?
You've met President Sisi several times. What do you think is are the main challenges facing Egypt now?
Stability, security, first off. Second, economic reform. And third, then, being able to create within Egypt a genuine political pluralism. And, you know, what's difficult to explain to the West, but I tried to do it, is that in our democracies in the West, we all agree on some common rules, right? The problem with the way the Muslim Brotherhood were governing in Egypt, and the problem with their ideology as a whole, is it isn't in the end really compatible with that type of democratic spirit. So that's why for President Sisi, the challenge is he's got to take Egypt on a journey. And that journey's got to be partly about rerouting security and stability, because without stability, you know, countries can't move at all. Making the economic changes, some of which are very painful, because there needs to be big reform and job opportunities for young people and so on, and that's easy to say and hard to do. But thirdly, he's got to be able to bring the country to a point where people understand that, yes, you can have a healthy political fight, but only if there's a common space of values which mean that you genuinely accept someone who disagrees with you. And as I say, the problem really, and I think the West doesn't often understand this, the problem with the Muslim Brotherhood philosophy is it doesn't really accept that pluralism. So those are his big challenges, and you know, I think it's very important, as I've said on many occasions, that the international community, whatever our criticisms, get behind them and support them.
My last question, again, and I know you have to run, is on responsibility as well. Don't you think that Great Britain, with all its great values, have provided safe haven to some of those fundamentalists, and really a secure place, a safe place, and then they come back to the region doing whatever they want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid we've been, look, I fought this when I was Prime Minister in my time in government, and there's just a basic, you know, it is very important we continue to provide political asylum for genuinely persecuted people. That is absolutely correct.
Genuinely persecuted people.
Yeah, but I'm afraid there has been a naivety about the ideology of the Islamists and what they've been trying to do, which means that we have sometimes given the ability of people to come to our country and then really to create both, not just instability abroad, but by the way, instability back home in our own countries. And one of the reasons why I keep saying to people in the West, we've got no option but to be engaged in the Middle East now, is that this isn't just your fight. I mean, we've got a fight inside Britain, Germany, France. You know, you look at our main security problems today, they're coming out of this region. So we've got a big stake in this fight too.
Mr. Tony Blayr, I want to thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you.